Hello humans, it's just Martine. I was going back and forth with myself in my mind as to what video I'd make besides my weekly reading vlog for this week, but I posed the question to some of my friends in a Discord chat, and Is Bailey Reading, shout out to her channel link down below, told me that I should talk about my all-time favorite books. So I sat down with my computer and I went to my Goodreads and I sorted them, like all the books that I have saved on there, by star rating. And I was writing down books in like a list, and then I noticed a couple of things about this list. One, almost all the books are books that I read in the past like 3 years, because that's about how long that I've had my Goodreads page, aka how long I've been tracking what I've been reading. Two, the ones that weren't are almost all middle grade, because it depends how you define an all-time favorite book. Is an all-time favorite book a book that you've reread a bunch of times? Is it a book that has stuck with you during the course of your life since reading it? Is it a book that was like well composed, well written, well thought out? Is it quality or is it nostalgia, basically? It's the way we're breaking it down. Because there are some books that I love that I would easily claim as my all-time favorite books that I roast all the time. If you want to see me roasting one of my all-time favorite books, I'll link to my rereading my favorite series part 1 video, part 2 to come soon, where I just really point out all the flaws in some of my favorite books, because it's mainly a nostalgia factor, not the perfect composition of a book that gets me to love it for all time, as it were. And I asked myself, can you include books that you have no intention of rereading, or books that you've only read very recently, like in the past few months, as some of your top books of all time, when you don't know what your relationship with that book is going to be like in the future? But I've read so many good books lately. So if we were going on that, there are tons of books that I could include from the list. In fact, most of the books that I wrote down on the list were books that I've read pretty recently, which is great news for my 2020 reading year, but bad news for an all-time favorites book list. I have to go. I'll continue this in a bit. So I think we're going to have to split this up into a couple different categories. One, my favorite nostalgic reads, and two, my favorite recent reads that haven't had enough time to simmer yet, if that makes any sense at all. There's this definite weird gap in my reading history, because I loved reading when I was younger, and then school got to be just a bit too much, and I no longer read for fun, or at least frequently enough to call it reading for fun all the time. In fact, I was pretty sure that I was no longer a reader in my life until like 2017, when my sister got introduced to BookTube. She became obsessed with reading again, and that love soon spiraled onto me. So there's like this whole chunk of the end of middle school, beginning of high school, where I barely read at all, and thus have no favorite books from that time. Like, if we're talking about books that have shaped me fundamentally as a person, and also that have stuck with me, obviously we're gonna have to have Kingdom Keepers. The Kingdom Keepers were my friends before I had friends. The Kingdom Keepers were also how I made friends in middle school. The Kingdom Keepers remained through high school. One of the ways that I grew my friendships. Like, I convinced one of my friends to read the entire series because I liked it, and her life was forever changed, and now we talk about Kingdom Keepers all the time. I'd also throw in Every Soul a Star by Wendy Mass, which I reread like 2 years ago and still loved. Harry Potter, of course, everybody loved those, but I went from only being able to read in French at the beginning of first grade to reading Chamber of Secrets in second grade, so it had a special place in my heart for that reason specifically. I'm a Slytherin, just for reference. And then there are all those audiobooks that I loved to fall asleep listening to, like A Cricket in Times Square, The Tale of Despero, this one Joey Pigza book, all those things. But if we're going to talk about books that I have loved recently that have the potential to impact me, I'd say stuff like Outlander and Lazarus. A big shout out to one specific book for being the favorite book that I claim when I feel like it will be socially unacceptable to say Kingdom Keepers 3, which would be Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. I listened to the audio play of Ender's Game shortly after getting back into reading, and then I read the physical book in one day for what was at the time Booktubeathon, for the first time that I participated, and I was on my way to Canada on a road trip that my family takes to see our family, like our relatives, and I just remember that being the best day of reading. Like, the book was kind of long, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to finish this. This is bold of me to do day one of Booktubeathon, but I read the whole thing and I loved it, and I remember we had Wendy's for lunch that day. And then my freshman year of college, I read Ender's Shadow, which is from Bean's perspective, but the same story of Ender's Game, and I loved it too. So, and no, I have not seen the movie yet. I've only heard bad things. And like, some of the books that I like are because of other books I like. For instance, I love the Illuminae Files series because it brought back vivid memories of my time listening to the audio play of Ender's Ender's Game. Some books are specifically special to me because they prove something to myself that I didn't know I could do. Like this past spring semester, both my sister and I read the French version of the first Harry Potter book, Harry Potter à l'école des sorciers. And I had no idea that I'd actually be able to keep up with it and know what was going on. And it was also just a fun time because Hufflepuffs are called Pouf Souffle. So we love that. But just in general, I think the problem that I'm running into if I try to come up with a list of my favorite books of all time is that I love so many books for so many different reasons. Each book that I read, so long as I remember that I've read it, which some I've seriously just blocked out of my mind, as long as I remember reading it, I usually have a memory associated with it, which makes all of them special in one way or another. There are a couple of books that I'm going to mention, partially because they bring on nostalgia, but partially they're just really feel-good reads for me. The first is the Murder, She Baked series, at least I'm pretty sure that's what it's called, by Joanne Fluke. Growing up, these were some of the first adult books that I read, and both my mom and my sister also read these books sometimes, so we got to talk about them together and experience them together, and that was one of the greatest feelings. I also really loved the Six of Crows duology for the specific reason that it involved a major heist, which is one of the reasons that my sister and I both love the Fox and O'Hare series. So again, we're going back to me liking books because they remind me of books that I like. But also Six of Crows is like very different from the Fox and O'Hare series because it's a fantasy series. But because it's a heist duology, it ranks way higher than other fantasy books would in my realm of enjoyment. I think one of the main takeaways from trying to figure out my favorite books of all time is that I like the books best that connect me with other people, including myself, books that help me feel my humanity distinctly, which is one of the same reasons that some of my favorite YouTubers are like the Vlogbrothers, because you know, life. I know there's some other books I want to mention briefly in passing. The White Giraffe is a middle grade book that spoke to me for several reasons, most of which involve the fact that the main character shares my first name, and in English literature I rarely see that because it's a very French name. But also, The White Giraffe audiobook was the first time that I'd ever heard a South African accent, so of course that impacted me greatly. And a Sarah Dessen book inspired my deep love of writing YA contemporary novels, The Truth About Forever, whose characters taught me how I want my characters to feel like for readers. The Wayward Children series has taught me that magic can be a very well-written thing and that short fantasy books are indeed valid, and also it captured a ton of feelings that I've had in my life, whether about just basic humanity, about logic versus nonsense, or about being a twin. And although I haven't reread it, my one time reading Wuthering Heights left me so impressed that I immediately handed it off to my sister to read. Has she finished it? No. Has it been years? Yes. And anything that has any sort of hint of Sherlock Holmes, I will read on principle. Any Sherlock Holmes type character, even if it turns out that the book wasn't good, it will have a special place in my heart because of that style of character. Middle Game by Seanan McGuire, another book that taught me that I could like a type of book that I previously thought I could never like, and also one that reached into my soul and discussed the feeling of being part of another person. Every book I've read by Ellen Hopkins has proved that literally any type of story can be told not only in prose but also in verse. And the books The Bromance Book Club and Undercover Bromance have proven to me that romance can be a genre that I give 5 stars to, which is rare for me because romance and I often don't get along. Same thing with The Honey Dauntless by Christina Lauren and Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating. Nevernight proved to me that Six of Crows was not entirely a fluke and that there were fantastical worlds that I could love, and that I do love that gritty feeling of Six of Crows, and that's one of the best atmospheric points in a fantastical story for me. The rest of the story by Sarah Dessen proved to me that Sarah Dessen is still writing great stuff, and that a book that is a YA contemporary does not have to be perfect to make me feel every feeling and to love new characters. Shout out to Rue. The Unit showed me that translated works can be so valuable, especially translated dystopian works, because they get slept on. And The House in the Cerulean Sea, I'm pretty sure everyone on BookTube is talking about this one right now, and it once again taught me that fantasy and I can get along. I don't know why that's a theme of just books teaching me that I can enjoy fantasy, but me still thinking that as a rule I don't like the fantasy genre. And there continue to be books every day that teach me about myself in ways that I never thought I could know. Every time I read a classic book and it turns out that I like it. Every time that I read a popular book and realize that I don't, or I let myself grab onto the hype train and live in that moment and enjoy things even though they're mainstream, which middle school me would absolutely abhor me for. All in all, I think every story that I've read in my life has had some sort of value, even if it's telling me that that's not a story that I like. So, is Bailey reading? I'm sorry that this is the video that you got from asking me to discuss my all-time favorite books. But also, I'm not, because it's provided a fun opportunity for me to kind of lose my mind over wondering what books are my favorite, what classifies an all-time favorite, and what books do I really need to reread. It also pointed out to me some different trends that I hadn't really noticed before, like the connection between the world of Nevernight and the world of Six of Crows. So thank you for the video requests. If anybody else has video requests ever, you can just leave them in my comments and I'll see what I can do. Let me know, how would you define an all-time favorite book? Do you have an all-time favorite book, an all-time favorite series? Do you have several? What are your top 5 if you do have them? And if not, why don't you have an all-time favorite book? I'd love to know. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and subscribe for more reading, writing, and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!